Well, hello, welcome. Today we're going to talk about 5 of the least known pub rock venues of the 1970s and 80s. If you like it, you know what to do, and subscribe. If you're not already subscribed, it would be great help to everybody, including yourself. Also comment, let me know what you think, and share it with your friends. But let's get straight on with the Elgin. Now, the Elgin is it's best known because it's where the Oneers played back in 1975, which is, of course, Joe Strummer's band before he got into the Clash. And the Elgin has been putting on music. It's a very small pub. It's quite grand. It's been putting on music since the 1950s when it used to do jazz, and this is a recurring theme. You will see this. And it's had the odd skiffle band here and there. And then I know it because I went there, first of all, to see a thing called Alternative Cabaret, which was something that it's the precursor of the alternative comedy thing, and it starred a lot of the people which eventually went on to found the Comedy Store and the comic strip and all that stuff. I'm not going to go into all that because it's a bit boring. Because the Elgin was always like a community pub. It depends who that community was, because back in the 1960s, I think, the guy who did the 10 Rillington Plays killer, John Christie, used to drink in the Elgin, and I'm sure you went there to watch a jazz band. And it was always a community pub, and that's why, you know, bands like the Oneers, who were very much part of that Notting Hill, Ladbroke Grove community in the 1970s. It was a very alternative scene, centred around Portobello Road, really, which is just up the road from the Elgin. And I went there a few times. As I say, I saw the Alternative Cabaret thing. The first time I saw it, it wasn't Alexei Sale, because he was famously the compere, the unknown Alexei Sale. I can't remember who he was comparing it. It was not all great, because there was comedy, there were people tearing paper and that sort of thing. And a lot of the music was very bland, to be honest with you. It was very like 1960s New York, Greenwich Village style folk without the panache or talent. But that's what you used to get back then. So fortunately, they only did 1 or 2 songs, I think, maximum. So it wasn't like a burden. And now the Elgin, I think it's still going, it's still a pub. It's much more upmarket these days because obviously the area has gone whoosh. And so it's not the place it was where I saw the Oneers all those years ago. And who's next then? The next pub we're going to talk about is one that's a little bit more well known. It's the Red Cow at Hammersmith. Now, a lot of people didn't realise this only started in 1975, and it did have a very long life. People think of it as being part of the Albion group, because Albion were the people who booked all the early pub rock venues that started when Dave Robinson, etc. If you want to read Will Birch's book, he'll explain all this. As I say, I always said there was music in pubs, and this just accentuated it. But basically, when they started, it was, I think, the Hope and Anchor and maybe just Hope and Anchor, and I don't know where else they booked, because it's all hazy and there's not much online about it. So if you need to know it, I'm about the only person that's delving and finding these things out, frankly. And there's precious little out there. I've got to go on my memory and what people I meet tell me, and I ask questions and I delve a bit deeper. But basically, from what I can see, the Red Cow at Hammersmith started in 1975, so it was ideally placed for the launch of punk like a year later. Because it was like a bit of an outlier, it was at 157 Hammersmith Road, London West 6, very near where I used to work, actually. My first job, proper job, was at Cadby Hall. J. Lyons were a big catering firm, and they had Lyons tea houses, corner houses, and they had a lot of restaurants, and they ran canteens and things. I was involved with that, and I was actually based at Brook Green, which, funny enough, the Red Cow was the pub we used to go into at lunchtime. Because in those days, it was quite common to go from your work and have a pint and a pie at lunchtime. Nowadays, of course, that's a bit frowned on, and quite rightly so. But back then, this was our local, and the Albion people were booking the Hope and Anchor, the Nashville, and a few other places. They used to push bands into the Red Cow because everybody wanted to play the Nashville, obviously, it's the big one. Or the Hope and Anchor, it's the famous one. And the Red Cow, they had to push bands in there. And I saw, I think, the Stranglers there, and I saw a few other people. I think the Stranglers came back when they were famous and did a secret gig under an assumed name. And I wasn't there for that because I was never a huge fan of the Stranglers. If I went to a gig and they were on, great, but I wouldn't actually seek them out. Because in the early days, you might know or might not know, they were called the Guildford Stranglers, and they're much more of a rock band. They were one of those bands, a bit like the Boomtown Rats and people like that, who saw punk happen and thought, blimey, we better get hitched to that. And so they changed their style, a bit like the Jam as well. They did that. But I think the Jam, Paul Weller and Bruce Foxton and Rick Buckler did it a bit better than most. But the Stranglers certainly managed to morph into this new wave band. I was more into the absolute punk stuff, or Ian Dury and the Blockheads, which had no pretensions to being punk, or Elvis Costello, something like that. At the time, the two independent London breweries were Fuller's Smith & Turner, commonly known as Fuller's, and Young's. Fuller's still brew in Chiswick at the Chiswick Brewery. Young's have outsourced their brewing, I think, to Charles Wells of Bedford, and now they're just a pub company. They, at the time, were quite keen on live music in 1975, but by 1978, they'd gone a bit cold. The Red Cow, back in the 60s, used to be a big mod hangout, and then in the 70s, it was, believe it or not, another country and western place, like the Nashville. Then by 75, it became, as we know, but by 1978, Fuller's decided they wanted to turn it into a family pub, and they eventually knocked it down and rebuilt a smaller pub with a Thai restaurant next door, and that was the Red Cow. It was never one of my favourite venues, frankly, but it was a venue. And who's next then? Well, this is one of my favourite venues, actually, and that is the Torrington. Now, the Torrington up at Finchley was run for a long time. There's a guy called George Blevins who started doing jazz there in, I think, 1958. And for some reason, they only did Thursdays and Sundays. I never really got to the bottom of this. Then I lived down normally in South London, Fulham, Putney to start with, and then Lewisham and Forest Hill and all that. It was a long way to go, especially on a Thursday or a Sunday night, so I didn't go that often. But I like to see George, and we had a chat on the phone quite a lot. And he booked the bands there. He went from jazz. In the 60s, they had like the proper stuff, like the Art Woods. I think the Stones played there and people like that. And then slowly it became this pub rock venue, and George was very good at booking bands, and he used to book the best, frankly. George had a very good taste. Because it was a Thursday and a Sunday night, it wasn't a peak night, like Friday and Saturdays were always the peaks. He often hit above his weight. Because on a Thursday and a Sunday night in Finchley, you may not get like full houses all the time, or you may do if you got like the right act on. So it meant that the pressure was off, whereas at the Cricketers on a Friday and Saturday night, when I was booking the Cricketers in the 1980s, you basically, the Friday and Saturday night bands, that was their peak night, and you had something like Gino Washington or Steve Marriott, and they didn't walk out of there with like top earnings for what they expect. They just wouldn't come back. So it was a bit competitive. There were a lot of venues back then. From what I can work out, the Torrington lasted till about 1997 with George Blevins booking it. Then Pete Finchley took over around then, and he was there for 7 years until the pub company, the Laurel Pub Company, who owned it, in their own words, accepted an offer they couldn't refuse in 2004, and the pub closed at the end of 2004. And Torrington is no longer there. I believe it's a Starbucks now, which is a fate worse than death for a pub, isn't it? I mean, really, going from putting on somebody like Mickey Joker or even Morrissey Mullen, oh, not my favourite, as you know, to being a Starbucks is a bit of a tumble, isn't it? But there you go. That's the way it goes. That'll serve them right for voting for Margaret Thatcher all those years ago. Oh, sorry, I don't mean to be political, because I know that most of the people watching this don't share my politics, so I better keep quiet, haven't I? And who's the next one, we ask? Do we ask that? Yes, we do ask it. And that is the Windsor Castle in the Harrow Road. Now, this was my local pub when I lived in Holloway Road, which is just around the corner in the, 73 time? Windsor Castle was very close to Ladbroke Grove and Pulpo Road and all that, but it was just far enough away that it wasn't quite in that thing. And I frankly didn't realise that the Windsor Castle, its fame, because it was built, the present pub, or the pub that's now flats, was built in 1859. It was originally built in the 1820s, but then knocked down and rebuilt. And the facade that was there all these years was built in 1859, I believe, and it had a very illustrious career, because back in the 1960s, it was an R&B venue, and the Rolling Stones played there, and the Kinks played there, and people like that, and it was very well known apparently then. I didn't even know all this. And then in the 70s, when I was around, it was more of a pub rock venue, and slowly when I was there's a guy who used to book it, I can't remember his name now, Barry I think. He used to work at an office just around the corner next to my landlord's, because my landlord had an office which was the old Rackman. This guy was in the first floor over them, they were in the ground floor, and there was someone else, I think somebody lived in the basement, and he was on the first floor, and he used to book a few minor venues, I think one in Hammersmith, but not the Red Cow. and he was never really top of the tree. And he was always into jazzy stuff, like jazz funky stuff. I don't know. I think he played in a jazzy funky band actually. So when I went there, I mean, I can't remember who I saw there now, but I saw some really good ones. I saw Dr. Feelgood there for sure. I saw people like that because it was in the start of the 70s. I suppose, moving on from its reputation in the 1960s with the Stones and the Kinks and the Who apparently played there as well, and people like that, it still was trading on that sort of reputation because it's only a few years afterwards. And then slowly it got worse and worse. And then I can remember after I moved away from Hormead Road, they started doing strippers on, I think, Thursdays and Sunday lunchtimes. Then the strippers did better than the bands and stuff like that. So then they put strippers on in the evenings, and then it's like, and then I think eventually the end of the pub came when they stopped doing music. It became a covers band venue. It wasn't a very good venue later on. And I think they tried to build on the first floor, which had been a sort of ballroom meeting room on the first floor. They tried to turn that into a lap dancing club, and apparently they fell out with the police or something and they lost their license. So now it's flat. So that's the Windsor Castle. It's a very good venue. It's very perfectly shaped. I'm pretty sure I saw Ian during the Blockheads there at the early start of their career, though Norman tells me it was probably Kilburn and the High Roads or his band Glencoe, because he didn't think, this is Norman Wattwright, the bass player in the Blockheads. I think he told me that he didn't think that Ian during the Blockheads played there. But a couple of people I've spoken to as well say they saw Ian during on the Blockheads there. So it's one of those mysteries that time, if you notice this, time trickles down. And often our memories are not as they ought to be. So anyway, that's the Windsor Castle. And finally,
back in the night, back in the night.
the last place we're going to talk about today is the Lord Nelson on the Holloway Road. I think it was possibly the first pub rock venue I went to in London, because don't forget, I lived in Yorkshire and then West Wales for quite a long time, so I didn't have any opportunity, especially as a schoolboy, to go to music pubs in London. And it was only when I came to go to my interview for my university place that I actually went to one or two places, because I'd heard about them obviously because it was like legendary. So I used to get the Melody Maker, and eventually I changed when I was in London to the NME and Sounds, because I used to like those better than the Melody Maker. Though frankly, most of the time I used to get all three actually, and occasionally the Record Mirror. So that's how fickle I used to be with the music press. I went to the Lord Nelson, this is like probably 1972, and I'm pretty sure it was Dr. Feelgood who were playing. I think it was a Thursday night. It was never at the top of the tree. The Lord Nelson was a good, solid pub where you could go and watch. They never, I don't think they splashed out, paid a lot of money, and it was always the cheapest one to go to. It was always 50 pence, where everyone else was charging a pound, or 75 pence or something. Everybody basically played there because it was one of the, especially in the early days of pub rock, the early 1970s, it was one of the better known places, and it was quite central because a lot of people lived around there, Holloway Road, Finchley Park and all that. So it was, I mean, obviously this is pre-Roby and pre all these other things, the Weavers and all that. It was the local pub rock venue that put on the pub rock band. So it got a certain name. It eventually picked it out, but then I can remember coming back from putting up posters for the festival in the early 2000s. It had reopened as a music venue, but I don't think it lasted long. And that was basically the end of a fine venue. So these are 5 venues I've not done previously. I've mentioned them perhaps, but I've not actually done them in this sort of depth. Don't forget, if it's the first of my videos you've watched, this isn't the only one I've done. So don't berate me for not including your favourite pub, because chances are I've already done that pub in another video. So do a search first before you start berating. You can still berate me, I don't mind being berated. I get used to it after a while. If I don't get berated 2 or 3 times a day, I don't feel my day is complete. So anyway, please watch another video. This one I think you might quite like, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.